The room did not erupt. It froze. Princess Sophie sat perfectly still as the trustees read the final, life-altering clause. But even before she spoke, everyone in that small, pressurized chamber understood exactly what had just shifted. This was not a gift of money, land, jewels, or ceremonial power. This was something far more intimate, a secret title carried in total silence by Queen Elizabeth for decades. And now, in a moment that caught the entire family off guard, handed to the one woman they felt least expected it. You are witnessing a moment that changed the internal landscape of the British monarchy forever. Before we dive into the fallout of this hidden inheritance and why it sent shockwaves through the hearts of those closest to the throne, make sure to hit that subscribe button. You do not want to miss the updates as we continue to uncover the stories the palace tries to keep behind closed doors. As the trustees finished, the atmosphere in the room was suffocating. Across the table, King Charles sat with his fingers locked together so tightly his knuckles turned white, his face etched with a kind of private pain no crown could mask. Camilla, the queen consort, stared at the confidant with controlled disbelief, her expression rigid. William, meanwhile, watched the trustees with a cold, piercing recognition. He understood immediately that this announcement hadn't just honored Sophie. It had exposed a fault line in the family that they had never intended for the world to see. A trustee placed a sealed cream folder on the table, speaking with a quiet, devastating finality. They confirmed that Sophie had inherited the title of Keeper of the Sovereign's private confidence. This wasn't a public rank or a fancy court decoration. It was a role written into the very fabric of the late monarch's most personal judgment, her sealed reflections, and her deepest guidance. Sophie blinked slowly, clearly struggling to process why she, of all people, had been chosen to hold the emotional weight of the woman who had defined an entire era. She had expected a quiet acknowledgement, perhaps a small token of gratitude for years of service. Instead, she had been handed the keys to the Queen's conscience. As the trustee revealed that Queen Elizabeth had approved this transfer years before her death, keeping it a secret until this exact moment. The room turned ice cold. The deeper wound, however, wasn't the title itself. It was who had been passed over to grant it. You have to understand, Sophie had spent years becoming the reliable royal. She was the one who showed up during the lonely seasons, the tense family storms, and the public duties that demanded grace without a hint of praise. She never fought for the spotlight, never turned her duty into a performance. And that, ultimately, was why this announcement cut so deeply. The title was a message. It suggested that Queen Elizabeth had drawn a permanent line between public duty and private confidence, and Charles felt that distinction like a blade placed on the table. The king realized the danger instantly. He carried the throne, the law, and the burden of the state. But this title proved that his mother had trusted someone else with the emotional truth behind her reign. While the crown could be inherited by birth, this specific, hidden power had to be earned by conduct. For Camilla, the humiliation was visceral. Having endured years of public judgment and family scrutiny, she now found herself excluded from the most intimate circle of Elizabeth's memory. It was a private rejection that stung far more than any public slight could ever hurt. William noticed something the others missed. The trustees weren't nervous. They weren't improvising. They had been waiting years for this moment. When a senior aide confirmed that this title granted Sophie access to a private archive of the late Queen's personal notes and confidential instructions, the room shifted. These papers weren't just souvenirs. They were a hidden map of loyalty, disappointment, and survival. To understand why this moment exploded, you have to go back to a night the family tried to bury, the Windsor Vigil. It was a dark, quiet evening where the late monarch asked her senior family members to speak with brutal honesty about the future of the crown. Most of them offered performance. Most of them spoke in slogans. But Sophie simply sat and listened. She didn't rush to comfort the Queen with easy promises. She offered a rare, sturdy silence. That night, she ceased being a relative and became a guardian. When Charles realized that this title was the direct result of that night, the night he had left early, the silence in the room finally broke. He pushed his chair back, the sound echoing like a gunshot, and asked the question that turned an inheritance into an accusation. Why had his mother trusted Sophie with what she never gave him? Sophie felt the walls closing in. She never wanted to stand above the king, never wanted to be a wedge between him and his mother's memory. But as the trustees explained that this role was designed as a safeguard to preserve the queen's moral voice, it became clear that no one, not even the king, could alter this decision. It was a command from beyond the grave, specifically designed to be untouchable. By the time the news began to leak, the title had already started reshaping the palace. When palace staff began preparing the archive room for Sophie, the exclusion of Camilla became official, if unspoken. It was a perfect, polite, and absolutely devastating display of hierarchy. No one shouted, but the removal of names from review lists was a message heard loud and clear throughout the halls of power. Yet, as the days turned into weeks, the story evolved. It stopped being about the wound and started being about the responsibility. Sophie wasn't a conqueror. She was a woman burdened by an impossible vow. She and William eventually stood together, looking out at the gardens, and the reality set in. This wasn't about power. It was about protecting the soul of an institution that was constantly in danger of losing itself to ego and pride. Sophie eventually opened that final, handwritten instruction. The words were brief, a simple urge to preserve dignity when the family turned against itself. In that moment, she stopped running from the title and accepted it. She understood that she hadn't been given a prize. She had been given a duty to act as a firebreak for the monarchy. While the world outside clamored for drama, seeing the headline, "The Queen's Private Choice," splashed across every paper, the reality was much quieter and much more profound. Charles eventually found a way to breathe through the pain, recognizing that his mother hadn't rejected him. She had simply recognized that ruling a country and guarding a heart are two entirely different jobs. Sophie remains the keeper of that truth today. She doesn't wear the title like a crown. She carries it like a quiet, heavy secret. She proved that in a world of cameras, politics, and performative loyalty, the most powerful thing you can do is simply be the person who listens. If you found this look behind the palace walls as fascinating as we did, make sure to let us know your thoughts in the comments. Do you think the Queen made the right call by keeping this title separate from the throne, or should such secrets have stayed with the family? Like this video if you enjoyed the deep dive, and subscribe so you don't miss our next investigation into the hidden history of the royals. We will see you in the next one.